What's up guys, in today's episode we are going to paint our Fokker's fuselage, build the BMW engine, and we have quite a lot on our plate, so let us get straight ahead. Since we finished the cockpit construction, this should mean we are closing the fuselage now, shouldn't it? Well, turns out no, because we still have some unfinished business on the inside left. As there are the sidewalls of the cockpit compartment, for example. As usual, I'm masking off all the mating surfaces and then lay down a white base coat. Why white, you might ask? Well, the fuselage of the Fokker was almost completely covered in fabric, and within the Aviattic decal set, we have these beautiful decals that show the backside of the camouflage pattern. And while we're talking about the pattern, let's address the elephant in the room. You see this word here? Now, I would consider myself as an avid English speaker, however I literally never heard this word outside of a World War I context. So in my stupid German mind, I thought that was the German name for this specific camouflage pattern, and that it would be pronounced German. Now this made me say the following. We will also use this full set of Aviattic Lozenge decals. Lozenge. Well, turned out the word is English and is actually pronounced like this.
Lozenge.
Okay, guess that's how I will call it from now on. Now, another cool feature of the Aviattic set, next to the historical accurate lozenge, is that they provide the backside of this kit decal here. Now the print would shine through the lozenge in reality, and Aviattic allows you to recreate this effect. Once I sealed the decals in with matte varnish, I'm messing them up a bit with ammo shaders. Oh, and don't worry about the parts that are not covered. They will be completely hidden by the cockpit construction later on. The upper wood section was base coated with ivory, wood grained with Abteilung Ochre, and sealed in with Tamiya Clear Orange. The leather parts are based with chocolate brown. We will refine them with oil paints later, but for now they would only be in our way, so let's skip that for the moment. Oh, and let's not forget to punch in the holes again for our rigging. One of the trademarks of Wingnut Wings kits are their highly detailed engines, and the BMW IIIa engine that is incorporated in this kit is a particularly fine example for this. Nevertheless, we are going to spice it up with some resin details by Taurus, namely valve springs and spark plugs. Now both of these details can also be scratch built, but I wanted to try them and I think it's a good thing to support these small manufacturers from time to time. Now Taurus do an insane job on these parts. They even provide you with stressed and relaxed springs so that you can imitate the correct valve sequence. Will this be visible later on? I highly doubt so, but it's a cool thing to have, wouldn't you agree? But before we start with the fancy stuff, let's do some humble assembly. Just the kit parts on their own are already really nice. Note that I put them together here without any glue, it's just to protect the connection points while priming. Speaking of primer, I will be unfaithful to my beloved Mr. Surfacer Black and go for Mr. Color GX2 instead, because I want that glossy finish as we will use a lot of metal paints here. And this is going to happen right now. The body of the engine is painted in alkyd aluminum, while I use steel for the breather tubes. Once the paint has dried, it's time to print the hell out of our engine with some nice BMW swag. While the decals are drying, I'm painting some of the smaller details. But let's get to the meat of the sub-assembly. Before we put on the Taurus springs, we obviously have to remove the kit parts. I'm gluing them in place with super glue. Don't forget to make sure they're properly aligned, otherwise it might literally look odd later. The lift arms on the camshaft also have to face their fate. The remainings of the shaft receive some aluminum details and is then glued in place on the cylinders. Some more detail painting on the exhaust outlets, and we can finally seal our base coat with a satin varnish. Now let's hop on and do some spark plugs. The first step is to deepen the pre-drilled holes to make sure our sparks sit tight and flush. Then we paint them in the color scheme that is given with the instructions. And then there's nothing much more left to do than glue them in their place. 12 spark plugs, 2 in each cylinder. You're still with me, guys? Next on our list are the wire conduits for the spark plugs. For whatever reason, the color call out here is rust, and my reference picture clearly confirms that. So let's go for some rust. But before that, let us quickly drill out the holes for the cables. Now for the paint job, I'm using 3 different rust tones from Life Color. I apply them highly thinned with tap water with a sponge. It's very similar, if not identical, to the wet blending technique. It's a quite simple and convenient technique that yields great results, and while we have the picture in front of us, let's tackle these cables that come out of the conduit. I'm drilling some pilot holes with a 0.1mm drill bit. Those are not only tricky to film, but also a major pain in the to work with in general, because they break just by looking at them. So after going through almost the entire pack of drill bits, I can finally plant my 0.1mm wire in the conduit. The wires receive a quick coat of Tamiya buff, and in the end you should be left with something looking like this. Now let's get the part to place and connect the wires with the spark plugs. Don't worry if you scrap the paint with your tweezers, it's easy to clean up with a brush once you're done. In the next step, I'm taking 6 threads of 0.1mm wire and twist them together. This facehugger-like creation goes straight into the holes that we drilled earlier. And let's not forget about our lifting arms. A quick paint coat, and they're good to go on the engine. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we got ourselves an engine. Now let's weather this bad boy. So we start out with the standard treatment that metal parts receive here on this channel. This means a thick black wash with Abteilung smoke. That is consequently stippled off almost completely, so that we are left with a nice patina and some dirt residues as you would find them, for example, on the rims of your car. Since I had the oil paint sitting on a cardboard, they are drying relatively quickly. However, I still give them a rest of about 24 hours, as I plan to do the next layer right on top of them, and I don't want the thinner to reactivate any of our previous work. So this next layer will be much more defined, as we are painting on some oil streaks. I'm adding on a small amount of paint, and then gently streak it down with a brush moistened and thinner. It's important to go in a strictly vertical direction, so that you are accurately mimicking the oil flow. I also want to alter the black cylinders and pipes. I will treat them with a highly thin filter of dust, just so they don't look as if it was their first day in service. And lastly, I'm picking out some details with a soft lead pencil. If you enjoyed the build so far, please take a second and hit the like button. It tremendously helps the channel to grow. Also consider subscribing to not miss the upcoming episodes. Now before we put the engine into the fuselage, we actually have to modify a few parts of the cowling to fit the particular version that we are building. This means drilling holes for the engine cooling and for the filler caps. The extra louvers on the side panel for the late version also have to go. After base coating the inside of those parts in alclad aluminum, I'm quickly picking out some details of the radiator in steel and brass. And then I'm weathering the whole bunch with the same techniques that we already used on the engine. Now let's get serious and bring those halves together. I'm having the lower wing and the upper cowling in place, but not glued, just to help with the alignment. Wingnut wings provide us with this molded lacing here, which is not only a beautiful detail to have, but also nicely covers up the seam lines on the underside so that we don't have to do any sanding here. The upper side needs some cleanup though, and I'm using black super glue for this task. Once the glue has dried, I'm sanding it flush with sanding sticks and different grades of sanding paper. Black superglue is super helpful here because you easily see where you have residues left. I was a bit afraid that putting the engine in would be a bit fiddly, but it actually went like a charm. However, it's after this point where the build became a bit tricky. The Wingnut wings construction is a bit unorthodox, to say the least. They want you to actually bend this pipe so that it fits into the engine. I really tried my best, but after about half an hour or so, I went with a more rustic approach, and I will replace the part later with some brass tube. But that's only where the trouble started. So in my book, if 5 out of 6 parts fit together perfectly, the 6th part shouldn't be a problem, no? Well, turns out that's actually not the case. And as you can see, I'm left with this rather enormous gap here. Now don't get me wrong, a gap is supposed to be there and the manual even calls out for filling it. It's just that I imagined it, well, less gigantic, and I'm pretty sure I made a mistake at some point. Okay, off to the rescue. Now the first thing you want to do before filling anything is to check that you still have a proper wing alignment. Fitting the wings of a biplane can be a critical task, even in the best of cases. And luckily, we're still pretty good in this regard. In the next step, I'm painting the cowling. I wanted to do this in a later stage, but this was when I didn't know I had a Grand Canyon to fill. So after a white base coat, I'm preparing my mix for the Yasta red. I'm sticking with the color call out by Wingnut wings, meaning 5 drops of gloss red and 1 drop of hull red. It's important to stick with exact ratios here, as we have to reproduce this exact same tone later in the build. As on the fuselage, I'm painting the leather parts in chocolate brown, to be refined with oil paints later. And after sealing the part with semi-matte varnish, I'm adding some sponge chipping. Now off to the gap. With a crack of this size, our weapon of choice is epoxy putty. I fill the gap and leave the putty to harden overnight. Then I'm adding a top layer of black superglue to fill up all the little holes and bumps. So off to some more sanding. I don't know about you guys, but for me, sanding ranks pretty high on the list of the most annoying tasks in modeling. So I'm skipping straight to the final result here. Off to the next step, which is covering the whole plane in a white base coat. It's of course really hard to ignore the irony here that I skipped the Goering scheme because it was all white, just to paint the plane all white now anyway. However, given that the white is only the undercoat for the decals, which by themselves are only the undercoat for the Yasta red, allows us to go rather sloppy here, as we don't have to achieve perfect coverage. Unfortunately, the paint job on the cowling received some fatal damage during all this action, so now I have to repaint it in place, masking all the tiny details, which is exactly what I was hoping to avoid by painting it separately in the first place. But let's proceed with some decals for now. I usually don't use gloss coat for my decals. However, the fuselage decals are quite big, and the smoothness of my paint job is of questionable quality, so I'm playing it safe here. The Aviattic decals are nothing short of a pleasure to work with. They are reasonably sturdy, but at the same time, they adapt beautiful to any detail that you have on the surface. Therefore, it's important that you align the rib tapes on the decals well with those ones on the elevators or on the wings, as the molded structure will show through. I'm a bit surprised that the decal for the side of the fuselage still fits perfectly, despite all the heavy work that we did there. Maybe my construction wasn't that far off in the end. If you, like me, have the outer rigging already attached, you have to cut a little slit into the decal for the cables to run through. The overlapping parts of some of the decals can be easily tamed with some decal softener. We also have to add some of the kit decals here. The serial number for the UDET machine was provided with the lifelike decal set. They are a bit smaller than the ones that coming with the Wingnut Wings kit, but beggars can't be choosers. Now let's hop off to the painting. I'm using the same mix for the Yasta red as earlier on the upper cowling. I'm painting the non-lozenge parts first, so I can use them as a color reference when we do the more delicate painting on the fabric fuselage parts later. So this scheme here, minus the red parts, would be what the Fokker would look like when it was delivered from the manufacturer to the units at the front. All other markings or color schemes would be applied directly in the field. And this field applied scheme is what we're going to tackle now. By now you surely have guessed what I'm planning to do. I want to spray the fuselage in the Yasta red so that the lozenge and the stencils still shine through. I'm using the same color mix as before, but highly diluted. Red paint has a poor coverage to begin with, and that plays in our favor this time. The challenge is to keep the paint coat both translucent, but also equally spread throughout the whole fuselage. Now this is a make or break part of the build. Technically, if things go wrong, I can still scrap off the color, scratch off the decals, order a new pack of Aviattic decals in the UK and restart all over again, but I think you get my point here. Now luckily, all this remains hypothetical, because I'm really happy with the result. Now off for the markings. In the last episode, I announced that I would use lifelike decals. However, in the meantime, Christmas came and I got myself a silhouette cutter. And now I'm finally able to print my own painting masks. So let's put them to work. Since the masking material is transparent, it's relatively easy to align them properly on the fuselage. The small tape stripe marks the endpoint of the cross on the other side to maintain symmetry. I'm mixing my own off-white color with Tamiya flat white and deck tan. And then it's time for the first paint coat to hit the fuselage. And for the moment, we got ourselves a nice Swiss aircraft. But let's make it a German one by adding the black inner cross. The inner cross is sprayed with my standard off-black NATO black. As you can see, the result is good, but not perfect, but that's nothing we cannot fix in a quick cleanup session. Next on the list is Udet's iconic low insignia. He sported this one on almost all of his planes during World War I, and that's a reference to his girlfriend and later wife Eleanor. So with all the markings on, we can consider the base coat for the fuselage as done. Now let's take care of some small details before we call it a day for this episode. One of them is the exhaust, and it comes in two parts. It also has some nice welding details on it. This type of construction leaves us with some gaps to fill, however. Those are really simple to fill with plastic putty though, and if you carefully wipe off the excess putty with a wet Q-tip, you almost need no sanding at all. The exhaust pipes on World War I planes were made of non-corrosive metal. So after the obligatory base coat of Mr. Color GX2, I'm laying down some all-clad flat aluminum. So while those exhausts wouldn't really rust, they still would take a good amount of heat discoloration. I'm imitating this effect with all-clad exhaust manifold. I'm carefully decreasing the opacity gradient from the hottest spots near the engine to the cooler ones near the exhaust outlet. And let's not forget to add some smoke residues here. To add some more metallic variety, I'm dry brushing on a bit of copper. So that's it for the base coat, and the result is already not too bad. However, we can still squeeze a few percent out here by refining it with oil paints. And that's actually quite easy. I'm speckling on some dark brown oil paint. And then I blend it in with thinner where the spots are either too big, too pronounced or whatever. This leaves us with some nice subtle staining, as it would be created by oil burning directly on the exhaust pipe. It also creates an interesting contrast between shiny metal finish and the flat finish of the oil dots. Now the last task in this video will be the machine guns, mainly in order to make the thumbnail look cool. Wingnut wings provide a fully molded one and a more detailed version with photo etch. For the sake of ease, we're going with the plastic part here. Nah, I'm just kidding you, we're going with the full detailed version. Our first task is to drill out the barrel, and this works best while the parts are still on the sprue. Next, I'm annealing the photo etch cooling jacket with a lighter, to make it easier to bend later. Afterwards, I'm putting all the parts in blackening fluid to spare myself the priming, and to avoid that all the fine openings on the parts will be filled by paint later. Now we need to bend the cooling jacket into its round form. And the best place to start is by using the plastic part as a template. Then I'm just picking a drill bit of the right size, bend the part around it, and give it a good roll. And that's already all the magic there is. Now we just glue the jacket to the plastic part with super glue, and here we are. It's quite a difference, no? Once I primed the guns with Mr. Color GX2, I'm dry brushing them with what is simply the best gunmetal color in the world, Mr. Metal Dark Iron. It's a buffable paint, so after drying, I'm buffing it with a Q-tip. And to finish it off, let's do a second round of buffing, but this time with a 4B leaden pencil. I'm quite happy with the result, but what do you think? Feel free to drop me a comment with your preferred machine gun painting technique. But enough of the jibber jabber. Let's assemble the missing details, such as this windshield, the machine guns, and the exhaust. Oh, and let's not forget about the radiator pipe that we so rudely chopped off earlier in the video. And with that, we're done for today's video. In the next episode we will do chipping, oil paints, weathering, all that good stuff. And of course it's hard to overlook that our plane still doesn't have any wings. So add that to the list as well. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate if you leave a like, as it helps the channel grow and helps to spread more love for World War I throughout YouTube. A subscribe is of course also equally welcome. It will keep you updated on any new videos coming up, and as I have a rather flexible upload schedule, that's a true benefit. Well, so far for today. See you next time.